My family treated my diagnosis like a death sentence, so I faked my death to see who would profit from it. The Morrow family mansion was a monument to old money and cold beauty. Juliet stood at the periphery of another vapid cocktail party, watching her mother, Vivienne, hold court. Her brother, Sebastian, held a glass of champagne, his laugh too loud. Juliet, an art curator, felt like an exhibit in their gallery of success. Her only true inheritance was the fierce, independent spirit of her late grandmother, Elena, the only one who had ever truly seen her. As she slipped a hand into her pocket, her fingers brushed against the small, ornate key Elena had given her, a secret she'd kept for years. "For when you need a truth they can't ignore," she'd whispered. Juliet had no idea how soon she would need it. The diagnosis was a shock but not a death sentence, relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. "It's a marathon, not a sprint," her neurologist, Dr. Evans, explained calmly. "With treatment you can live a full active life." Juliet felt a wave of fear, followed by determination. She decided to tell her family, hopping for a sliver of the support she'd seen in other families. She arranged a dinner, her heart a fragile bird in her chest. She needed them now more than ever. She delivered the news in her father Robert's study. The reaction was not fear or sympathy, but a cold, calculating silence. Vivienne's face tightened with distaste. "A neurological disease? How public?" Sebastian leaned forward, his eyes gleaming not with concern but with opportunity. "This will affect the trust funds, you realize. The medical costs, it could drain everything. Father, we need to reconsider the distributions." Robert simply stared at his hands. Juliet's hope curdled into a hard, cold lump in her stomach. They were writing her obituary in real time. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological torture. Vivienne began suggesting funeral homes with excellent aesthetic sensibilities. Sebastian, accidentally, emailed her a spreadsheet modeling the financial impact of her long-term disability. They spoke of her in the past tense, as if the diagnosis had already killed her. The final straw was overhearing Vivienne on the phone. "It's a tragedy, of course, but we must be pragmatic. The assets must be protected from depletion." Juliet realized she wasn't a daughter or a sister. She was a ledger entry they were preparing to close. Consumed by a grief so profound it felt like a new kind of illness, Juliet went to the two people she trusted. Her best friend, Nadia, a sharp-witted tech entrepreneur, and Dr. Evans. In the privacy of Nadia's apartment, she laid out her insane plan. "I'm going to give them what they want," she said, her voice eerily steady. "I'm going to die." Nadia, after a moment of stunned silence, grinned. "I'll handle the digital ghost. We'll make it airtight." Dr. Evans, morally conflicted but outraged on her behalf, agreed to provide the necessary medical credibility. The Phoenix Pact was sealed. The plan was meticulous. Juliet took a solo trip to the family's remote coastal cliff house under the guise of seeking peace. She spent a day establishing a presence. Then, on a stormy night, she executed the final act. She left her car parked erratically near the edge of the cliffs. A single, torn piece of her distinctive silk scarf was snagged on a jagged rock. Her phone, wallet, and one shoe were left behind. She then slipped into the waiting car with Nadia, who had hacked the local traffic cameras to create a blind spot. By the time the police were called, Juliet Mora was gone. The family's reaction to her suicide was a study in grotesque efficiency. The funeral was arranged with swift, cold precision. Vivienne wore black couture, a performance of dignified grief for the society pages. Sebastian gave a eulogy that was a thinly veiled tribute to the family's resilience. Robert was a silent, broken ghost, but his inaction was its own betrayal. There were no real tears, only the quiet, palpable hum of anticipation. The vultures were ready to feast. From a secure, anonymous apartment Nadia had arranged, Juliet watched the digital aftermath. Nadia had created a flawless trail. Fake search history for painless exit strategies, anonymous forum posts from a user named HopelessMS, and a scheduled suicide note email that was sent to the family after her disappearance. The police investigation was brief. The evidence was compelling, the family was uncooperative, and the case was quickly closed. Presumed death by suicide. Juliet was a ghost. The speed of the asset grab was breathtaking. Sebastian moved into her art-filled apartment within a week, selling off pieces he deemed too modern for his taste. Vivienne began liquidating a trust fund Juliet had controlled, citing estate consolidation. They didn't mourn, they administered. Juliet watched via hidden cameras she and Nadia had planted, her heart hardening with every callous conversation about managing the fallout and maximizing returns. Their greed was even more profound than she had imagined. The real mystery began when Juliet noticed Sebastian and Vivienne obsessively searching her old apartment. They weren't just looking for valuables, they were tearing the place apart for something specific. "It has to be here," Sebastian snarled on the audio feed. "A small antique key. Grandmother was always whispering to her. Without it, this is all for nothing." The pieces clicked into a horrifying new picture. This wasn't just about greed, it was about a secret. The key in Juliet's pocket suddenly felt heavy with consequence. Juliet retrieved the key from its hiding place. She remembered her grandmother's words. The truth they can't ignore. With Nadia's help, they identified the bank. Using a forged ID and a veil of secrecy, Juliet accessed the safety deposit box. Inside was a single document, her grandmother's true final will. It left the entirety of her vast fortune, the core of the family's wealth, solely to Juliet, citing her integrity and strength. A note attached read, "My dear Juliet, I knew they would try to cheat you. Use this to build a life they cannot touch." The current will, which divided the assets, was a forgery. The revelation was a thunderclap. They hadn't just wished her dead, they had already stolen her future. Her grief was now a pure, burning fuel for vengeance. This was no longer just about exposing their callousness, it was a crusade for justice. She would reclaim her name, her fortune, and her grandmother's legacy. Operation Phoenix shifted from a test to a war. Juliet, with Nadia and Dr. Evans as her star witnesses, hired a ruthless, discreet attorney. They filed a petition to have her declared legally alive, presenting their evidence of the family's psychological abuse and the staged death as a necessary measure to escape their toxic influence. The case was sealed, a legal torpedo heading silently for the Morau family's hull. They had no idea the ghost they had buried was about to rise from the grave, armed with a weapon they had created. The perfect venue presented itself, the annual Morau Foundation Gala, a spectacle of self-congratulation where Vivienne and Sebastian would be at their most triumphant. It was a stage built for their hubris, and Juliet would use it for their downfall. Invitations were sent, the elite of the city were gathered. The family arrived, beaming, the undisputed rulers of their diminished but still opulent kingdom. Vivienne was midway through her speech, praising the family's enduring strength in the face of tragedy, when the main screen behind her flickered. The family crest vanished, replaced by a live feed from the entrance of the ballroom. The doors swung open, and there she stood, Juliet Morau alive, dressed not in mourning black but in a vibrant crimson gown, her posture radiating a health and power they had never seen. A collective, horrified gasp sucked the air from the room. She walked down the center aisle, a microphone in her hand. "Hello, Mother," she said, her voice echoing in the stunned silence. "You started the party without me." She reached the stage, turning to face the crowd. "You all thought I was dead. My family certainly did. They held a lovely funeral." She looked directly at Vivienne, whose face was a frozen mask of terror. "But you see, I wasn't dying. I was diagnosed with MS, a manageable condition. But to my family, a manageable condition was a terminal one. It was an inconvenience to their inheritance. The moment I told them," Juliet continued, "they began planning my funeral and dividing my assets. But they were nervous, they were looking for something." She nodded to her lawyer, who projected the true will onto the massive screen. "This is my grandmother's real will. It leaves everything to me. The will you all operate under, the one my mother and brother have been using, is a forgery. They committed fraud to steal from me while I was still alive." Before they could scream denials, Juliet played the audio. The room heard Sebastian's greedy plans, Vivienne's cold calculations, and their frantic, vicious search for the key. The evidence was irrefutable, their own words condemning them. The crowd's shock turned to revulsion. The prestigious Morau name was being publicly flayed. Security, pre-briefed by Juliet's lawyer, moved in. Vivienne was shrieking, a raw animal sound of rage and defeat. Sebastian lunged toward Juliet but was swiftly restrained, his shouts of "you lying bitch" only sealing his guilt. Robert simply sank into a chair, a hollow man witnessing the collapse of the world he enabled. They were escorted from their own gala in handcuffs, arrested for fraud and forgery, their humiliation complete and very, very public. In the quiet aftermath, the legal machinery worked swiftly. The true will was validated. Juliet became the sole heir to the Morau fortune. Her first act was to formally and permanently disinherit her father, cutting the final toxic tie. The fortune was no longer a curse, it was a tool, her grandmother's final gift of freedom. Juliet didn't just want to possess the wealth, she wanted to transform it. She established the Elena Foundation, dedicating its vast resources to funding MS research, and providing legal and financial support for victims of familial financial abuse. The money that had bred such toxicity was now a force for healing and empowerment. Her grandmother's legacy was finally being honored. She moved into her grandmother's old, sun-filled estate, a place that held only good memories. She continued her work as a curator, but now with the freedom to champion artists she believed in, not just those who were fashionable. The shadow of the Morau name was gone. She was simply Juliet, whole and unburdened. Months later, a letter arrived from her father. It was full of weak justifications and pleas for forgiveness. Juliet read it once, then fed it into the fireplace, watching the flames consume his empty words. She felt nothing, not hatred, not pity, just a profound, peaceful silence. The chapter was closed. The ghost was at peace. At a checkup, Dr. Evans smiled. "Your vitals are excellent. The stress levels are down significantly." Juliet laughed, a genuine free sound. "It's amazing what happens when you remove the parasites." Her health was stable, her future bright. The illness her family had treated as a death sentence had, in a twisted way, given her back her life. Juliet stood in her grandmother's garden, the key now displayed on her desk as a reminder. She hadn't just faked her death, she had allowed the person they wanted her to be, the weak, dying heiress, to perish. From those ashes she had risen, not just to reclaim what was hers, but to build a life of purpose and truth. The inheritance test was over. She had passed, not by their standards, but by her grandmother's, and she had emerged not as a Morau, but as a phoenix, forever free.